All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with David Ask. David, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Man, thanks for having me. What a joy to be here today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? I want to start off. I want to give a shout out to Juliana Starchersky because I got connected with her, and it's just such a pleasure getting to know her a little bit. And through that process, she was like, Kevin, she goes, I'm going to connect you with my friend David because you absolutely need to have him on your podcast. And I'll tell you, anybody who comes through Juliana is somebody that I want to get to know and have a conversation with.
Man,
And uh,
that's great. She's fantastic.
and you know, that right there, what a testament to the power of right relationships, which of course is what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
And when you have right relationships, it just opens up doors, it opens up opportunities. I mean, David, you and I, we've already got the chance to talk and get to know each other. And, you know, I, I felt like I'd known you for years just because of the way we got connected in the first place and stuff, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
and here we are now, getting ready to do this interview, and I'm like, I have really been looking forward to this. And
Oh,
so
man. Me too.
so what I want to do is I just want to start off by I want to turn it over to you so we can set a little bit of context here. And I
Okay.
want you to be able to share, I'm going to kind of cast a broad net and just give you a little bit of leeway as far as where you want to go and just kind of share from your heart. But I want you to be able to share about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you get to do, and also give us some of the backstory because what I do know is you've got an amazing backstory, and I want to make sure we get to hear that too.
Man, well, thank you for that. And like I said, it's a pleasure to be here. Whenever I'm doing an interview like this, I feel like, the point is not you and me, right? The point is your audience. And I'm like, how can we best, serve the people that we don't even know who are listening right now? And I do believe that it's, sharing the story is quite often one of the best things that we can do because quite often people are, feeling like they're under the gun or they're behind or
Yeah.
they're comparing themselves to others and, I don't know how to do this and I don't, have what it takes and I don't have the right connections and all this kind of stuff. And of course that's, I suffered with that for a long time. So a bit of a backstory. So I grew up in a little town called Glenwood, Minnesota. It's a town in central Minnesota. I was just there last week for their annual Waterama Festival, which like triples the size of the town for the weekend. And my my parents still live there, so we got to do a family and friend reunion, which was really great. But I ended up moving to Nashville in 1994 and
Okay.
attended Belmont here. And it was interesting. It just quickly became home. But the reason I moved here was actually for music. So I was a vocal major, and I love to sing. And it was funny, right when you get out of high school, right? You're wondering, well, what am I good at, or what do I want to do, and that kind of stuff. Well, it was really the only thing I felt like I was good at, and at the same time, even now, but then especially there was something so transcendent, as it were, about, that space for me. And again, I can't compare how other people, kind of intuit music in their lives and things, but I think that what's fascinating is I came to understand that music for me was more about relationships than it was music. There's a lot of people, around the world, and of course, Music City, USA, that they just love the craft of music. They love the how all of the instruments and people and things come together to create something. And I sure do as well. But I realized after many years that my, motivation, as it were, for singing and participating in concerts and things like that wasn't necessarily the music. It was more about the connection with others and how do I, cause someone to look within and maybe look up a little bit as well. So it became more of a tool of sorts, that came from a really authentic place in me to, to move someone and to change the way that they might think about themselves and those around them. and it still is. So yeah, I it was a funny thing. I remember growing up, I was so drawn to entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And the funny thing is I didn't really realize the difference between an entrepreneur and a business owner.
Okay.
Not everybody who owns a business is an entrepreneur. They might have just created a job for themselves, which is great, right? That's fantastic. But there were a few people in my town. In fact, I ran into one of them after 20 years of not seeing him, a guy named Phil, who had this multiple revenue streams, right? He had his hand in all kinds of different stuff, in sales and real estate, and I mean, even now he runs a food truck, and just got all kinds of. I think he has a Christmas tree farm. I mean, there's so many things this guy is doing, and I remember looking, again, I was in high school at the time, seeing him doing all kinds of different stuff. And honestly, I thought, well, what the heck? Who does this guy think he is? Like he's breaking some laws or something, right? He's, going against the grain. And at the same time, I was so drawn to that, thinking, man, what a lifestyle that you're not, necessarily tied to one thing or tied to a desk or, you've got someone else telling you, when you got to come to work and so on.
Mhm.
So it was funny, Kevin, when I moved to Nashville, that was in the back of my mind. I'm like, how can I, live that lifestyle? Like, what does it look like to, you know, have a few different irons in the fire and have some margin with my time and things? But I just had no idea what that might be, what those avenues were and how to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I started, listening to everybody from Dan Miller, the guy that wrote 48 Days to the Work You Love and No More Mondays, and Dave Ramsey and Michael Hyatt and guys like Jim Rohn and some just older, folks that kind of, were pioneers with just thinking differently.
Yeah.
And it was so amazing how, that kind of stuff started to kind of prime the pump inside of me to take larger risks and just start to look at life differently, look at what's possible differently. And so here's what's really fascinating is you and I, like I said, like you said, I felt like first time we talked, I felt like I've known you forever. And I think largely, our personalities so appreciate relationships, right? This is the whole genesis of your podcast here. Well, when I started hanging out with people, that thought differently than me, right? They started rubbing off on me. And I'm like, well, good night. I never thought of it that way, or I never thought that was possible, or, how did you do that? And then you start, aggregating all of this momentum and wisdom and knowledge around stuff. And, so things kind of started clicking and colliding. And then opportunity, oddly enough, presented itself. And so about, let me think here, 12 years ago, my first, besides music, my first real entrepreneurial endeavor was actually, based around an invention that
Okay.
was not necessarily my idea. My brother-in-law called me one day. So I was working in the real estate group for Verizon. So I had, 5 states, 75 stores, a couple of call centers that I was, kind of overseeing on a facilities front, and fantastic company, fantastic job, as it were. And I remember he called me one day and he goes, "Hey, David, where do I get a thermostat guard with a combo lock?" He said, "These people can't keep up with that tiny key." Well, instantly, I knew that that was a pain point because, of course, at all of our stores and so on, we have to use thermostat guards because everybody keeps jacking around with the thermostat, right? We all get those, the thermostat wars, right? Even at home for that matter, everybody's messing around with it. And the funny thing though is of course everybody had a hard time keeping up the key for the stat guard. So long story short, he and I went into business together, and I ended up buying him out a few years into that. And I just kept running with it. I didn't know what I didn't know. I honestly I leaned on Dan Miller quite a bit, and he became a friend of mine, and just started talking about how do I do this, and it was really amazing how some opportunities started popping up, and then even in that that whole experience, right? Every single bit of it was new. I'm a vocal major with a desire to run a business of some sort. Well, now I have to learn what does it mean to source, plastics injection
Yeah.
molding and locks and graphics for a box and all this stuff and shipping. And so, just dove headfirst into that world and then, come to find out it was really hard to compete unless you went overseas for plastics on that level. So we ended up having to go to overseas to do that. And then that opens up a whole nother world, right? With, just the customs of those countries and shipping and tariffs and supply chain management and all that stuff. So anyway, long story short, here we are, or here I am, my wife and I, really 10 years later, we're in 3,700 retail stores,
Wow.
Home Depot and Lowe's, and we're in the True Value distribution chain. So now we're trying to reach out to all of those store owners and get into their stores. But we've got 10 years of a track record of selling hundreds of thousands of thermostat guards with a combination lock. And I'm really excited about that. But yeah, and then of course, just that has opened up a bit of margin in my life with my time. And during that experience, and I'll tee up kind of the next chapter of our conversation with a quote. So
Okay.
you might have heard this. There's a former PM of England, Benjamin Disraeli, and he says the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And I remember a few years ago when I heard that, I was like, man, he basically put language to something that was so true to my mission, even when I was a kid. I didn't realize how I like, and I'm talking, even when I say this, I get goosebumps. I love to see the riches in someone else, the uniqueness, right? The things that light them up, the little picadillos, the strengths and how they want to apply those things, their true authenticity. And I like to shine a spotlight on that. I like to name it, to validate it, to call it up, to, call it out. And I've just been kind of rolling like that my whole life. And what's fascinating is when I joined my mastermind group, Iron Sharpens Iron Mastermind, I met a dear friend of mine, Dr. Andy Garrett, who's a clinical psychologist. Uh, his grandpa is Carl Karcher, the guy that started the Carl's Jr. Burger chain.
Okay.
And he's just become a close friend, and he and I are working together now. But he really started to give me more tools in my belt as to, what is authenticity? Like where do we even get that word, right? What is identity, and how is that misunderstood? And how do you become resilient and gritty and move forward in life and crush obstacles and do that from an intrinsically, motivated place as opposed to the kind of the waxing and waning external stimulus, whether it's applause or fear or things like that. So I feel like my life is as a creative is front, is kind of in full steam here. But then I also am launching with Juliana Stakursky that you mentioned, um, a whole nother kind of chapter here coming up with regards to helping people identify, right? That word identity, identify those things that are absolutely most true about themselves on every single level, and then doing that for, their family, like fathers and sons and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of a lot there, but I'm really excited about what's going on in this next chapter and feel incredibly pulled forward into that space.
Yeah. Yeah. What a awesome journey that you've been on. And like you said, the when you just show up, the opportunities show up, you know.
Yeah.
And I doubt that you ever imagined before, like when you were in high school or even leading up to it, that you'd have this business uh, providing this, stat guards for people,
Yeah. Not in my
that probably
wildest
wasn't really on
dreams.
your radar. And
Well, it was not even on my radar. I just, I'll be honest, I've suffered with such insecurity my whole life. And I just thought that was for those who had the Midas touch, the people that were somehow had something that everybody else didn't. and I just didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And, it really held me back for a long time.
Yeah. And really, what you did is you just saw a need and you filled it.
Yeah.
That there was already the stat guard in place, but it was key lock and people were losing the key. It's like,
Yeah.
well, let's make a combo lock and there's no key to lose.
Right. Just a little
Now,
better mousetrap situation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's always the thing is we just find a problem, and if we can solve that problem, then people there's value in that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
For sure.
and and looking at what you've done, you're in Lowe's, you're in all these stores, and there's obviously a big impact that's being made here because they recognize that, oh yeah, we want to be a part of this because we have people that come into our stores that if we have this product, this is going to solve a problem for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It was amazing, by the way. The first meeting that I had with Home Depot, they invited me to their headquarters in Atlanta, and it's talk about an intimidating place. It's, 5,000 people in this basically their own little city.
okay.
And I mean, it's just a massive place. And I remember sitting at the kind of the boardroom table with their merchant there. And first thing he said, he held it, looked at it, and he goes, "Man, I wish we would have thought of this." He said, "Welcome to the family." And, that would talk about, one of those Super Bowl moments, as an entrepreneur, I just about blacked out. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I love that story, and I love the impact that you're making through doing what you do. And like I said, it's just you showing up and being you. And
It
that's the
is.
beautiful part right there. We don't
Yeah.
have to compare ourselves to anybody else. And like you said, you think like, oh, these people who are really successful, they got something that I don't, and no, they don't. No, they don't.
No.
They're just doing their thing, and you're doing
Yeah.
your thing.
Yeah, yeah, you
And
nailed it. It really is this idea of showing up is such a big deal, and it's hard, right? We struggle so much with some of that internal. My buddy Greg calls it head trash,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
hard to just keep showing up every day, and whether that's personally or professionally. But I tell you what, I mean, it's kind of like the old shots basket. What's that phrase in basketball?
oh yeah,
The shots you
you
don't
miss
take,
all the
right?
shots you never
Yeah.
take. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's amazing. While sometimes the reason you won is just because you were the only one standing there
yeah,
and nobody else was. And
yeah,
it's the showing up, portion of that is absolutely paramount.
yeah, yeah. Well, so now that we've got some context set, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. So I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. So, David, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited
Yeah.
to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah. Well, I love the question. And of course, I think that, so many people can look back in their lives and you know what? There are those one or two or three people that had a significant impact.
Yeah.
And so it's a funny thing. I would have to say the first person that came to mind would be Aaron Walker, who started the Iron Sharpens Iron Mastermind group.
Mm,
But through that, right, it's several people that I met, through ISI that have just absolutely shifted the way that I think about myself. Like even like I said earlier, the word authenticity, the word identity, this resilience and grit. Dr. Andy's had such a massive impact in my life. And there's a few other guys. I'm not going to try to name them all because I'll forget some here, but have had such a huge impact in my life. But it's really because Aaron Walker, kind of showed up.
yeah.
He was in Dave Ramsey's Eagle group, like 10 guys that met for 20 years. And when they, kind of stopped meeting, I think it was Dan Miller who encouraged him, hey, you need to do some coaching. And that turned into ISI.
Okay.
And here's a funny story, by the way. So I remember hearing about ISI for the longest time. And this is when I was working at Verizon and I was kind of just getting the business started, fooling around, had no idea what I was doing, and just a lot of head trash. And I kind of knew that I needed to join this group. And, but you know why I didn't? Out
Why
of
is that?
absolute insecurity.
Okay.
I heard about all the other 150 men who were in this group and, what they're up to and running all these big businesses and all this kind of stuff. And I just, out of absolute insecurity, I kind of waited. And it was funny. Aaron called me one day and we had coffee and he said, "Hey, we're doing our annual event at this cool place down in Smithville, Tennessee called Evans Mill." And he said, "Would you be willing to just do some music for the event?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to do that." Well, I got down there a bit early and I stood in the back of the big, conference room they were in, and I started listening to all these guys talk about their challenges and a few speakers and so on. And I was like, man, I need some support. I don't know what I don't know, and I need everything from wisdom to, some accountability and encouragement and everything else. And it still took me another year, to sign up.
Huh?
And
Wow.
but what was fascinating is through all of the years, I think it's been, I guess this month is, it's either 7 or 8 years. I forget when. I think it's, yeah, 7 years. Yeah. Anyway, I look at where my life is from then until now. I literally have, I left Verizon and I've more than doubled my income. My physical health is better. My marriage honestly has been really, really good most of the time anyway, but that's even better. We talk about everything from raising kids to cash flow to investing for the future. I mean, you name it. There's no stone unturned in that group. It was, I think he says, and I like this. He said, when you join a group like ISI, you get a virtual board of directors for your business, but you get a band of brothers for your personal life.
Nice.
And it's amazing, some of the people that I've met, in that group. I remember one day, a guy named David Ash. He and I ended up joining on the same day. They ended up getting our paperwork.
So they got David Ask and David Ash on the same day,
Yeah.
huh?
Well, and they thought it was like a typo and this
Uh-huh.
and that,
Uh-huh.
but then they realized, wait a second, he's an attorney in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm of course a vocalist slash wannabe entrepreneur in Nashville, and so, but as I got to know David Ash, I remember probably maybe a year and a half in. He called me one day, and I mean, we'd walked, really closely, and he said, "Hey, David," he said, "I just wanted to tell you something. You are made of awesome." And, it was almost like somebody just, shot a lightning bolt into my heart because why did it mean so much coming from this guy? He knows everything about me. Like these are absolutely close relationships, and we talk about absolutely everything. And it was so great to have, one of the people on this world, that knew me the most, love me the best. And, it was just, yeah, it was life changing. And then, kind of a side note, he's the one who actually, kind of called me out one day and he goes, "David, you don't get it." He goes, "You don't sing because you like music." And I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Well, how many concerts have you been to in the last 10 years?" And I'm like, "Three, unless they were my own." He goes, "How many, records have you purchased in your life?" I'm like, "Eight." I mean, it was a funny thing. I'm a vocalist, right? A vocal major who d doesn't go to concerts, who doesn't really even listen to music. He goes, "David," he said, "you do music because you like to inspire people." He said, "You speak because you want to inspire people. You want them to look up and see the beauty that God has written all over them and to look up and to
Wow.
see the beauty, as C.S. Lewis says, is ride the sunbeam to the sun."
Yeah.
And he's so right. And it started to really shift, kind of this sense of self-awareness away from kind of being a musician to being on mission.
Yeah.
as far as, causing people to just awaken inside. And, so I'm writing, this book, The Guardians of Grit for Fathers and Sons. And largely it's kind of goes back to that quote, the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And what would it look like? I think what would it look like for every father to, have identified, right? Identity, the most powerful, precious, courageous, goosebump driven things in themselves on a very granular level in order to do that for their sons and to be very specific about calling forth, calling up and naming, galvanizing, validating those things in their sons that are so powerful and unique as opposed to just this, generic, vague way of, be nice, don't be a jerk, and work hard and don't be a jerk. And so I'm on that mission right now, and I really feel like the uniqueness piece that Dr. Andy's helped me really understand is paramount and always has been to who I am authentically. So this type of, mission, as it were, and activities that I'm participating in with writing and speaking and so on, I feel like I'm breathing when I'm doing it. It's so natural to who I am.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of exciting to see what this next chapter might look like.
Yeah. Wow. So this is really fascinating. I want to dig a little deeper with you. And I'm sure you can come up with a number of examples for what I'm going to ask you here, but I just want to challenge you to come up with one.
Okay.
What is an example of a situation where you personally, you got to make this really big impact? And maybe even in the moment, maybe it even surprised you a little bit. Maybe you were just like, wow, look at what just happened there. And but yet you also know that would have never happened if not for your relationship with Aaron and the folks in the group there. What's an example of something like that, David?
So a big impact. Man, um, it's interesting. Well, I'll say two things here. So I think that my ability to really swing for the fence, and I'm talking swing for the fence. I literally asked through a friend of mine to have a senator send my latest song to President Trump, and they did. And I'm like, why can't I sing at the White House? What's stopping me? I've done concerts at places I had to sign non-disclosure agreements at. In fact, I'm looking at one on the wall that I can't even mention publicly. And I'm like, you know what? Why not me? So I think that, so two things. I think that as far as this idea of impact, why can't me, little old dude, growing up in a town with one stoplight, do business with Home Depot and Lowe's? And, I'm just launching a new thermostat guard called the Lockbox Pro that's going to be going to the Pro channel. And I'm going to try to get that into, Granger and all these other big supply houses and so on. But here's the funny thing. Okay, I sure hope that, if I were to die today, that people don't talk about thermostat guards and even music for that matter, honestly. I would hope that they would, um, uh, I guess, say David was was maybe one of the most loving but strategically loving people, and he showed up. So to your point, you know what? Here's what I love. There's so many times when I show up and and I don't have some big agenda. In fact, a lot of times I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just showing up. And I feel like God does something in that moment that only he could do. So a few years ago, my a former pastor of ours who had retired but was doing some prison ministry, he said, "Hey, I'm going to the local prison here." And he said, "I've convinced the chaplain and the warden, whatever, to do an ice cream social that they've never allowed." He said there's going to be about 50 men, in this room. And he said, we're just going to do ice cream and just sit and talk. And he said, I was wondering if you could sing a couple of songs.
Mm.
And I'm like, sure. Well, truth of the matter is I had a lot of fear, about going into a prison, honestly. I think, rightly so for a lot of reasons. And so, long story short, we get there, and I sat down at a table across from a couple of guys. One of them was really chatty and, conversational and seemed like he was honestly like he was, getting ready to go play golf or something. It was kind of funny, his disposition. But the other gentleman who looked very sophisticated, even in a jumpsuit, was had his arms on the table in front of him and he was just kind of staring, into nothingness, right? He was checked out.
Okay.
And so, for 20 minutes, I'm talking to this other guy. And finally, I looked over and tried to make eye contact with him. And I said, "Hey, are you okay?" And he didn't respond. So I reached out and I grabbed his forearm and I just said, "Hey, man, are you all right?" And he like like he was telling me about eating a ham sandwich or something. He said, "No," he said, "I think I'm going to kill myself tonight."
Wow.
And I was like, "Ooh." Well, truth of the matter is I don't know him. I didn't know why he was there, what he had done or whatever the situation was. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to give him some stupid answer, some pad answer. And I didn't know what to say. And so I think I said something briefly. I said, "Well," I said, I'm going to sing a song here in a couple of minutes, and I hope it encourages you." I think I said something like that. I didn't know what to do. But so here's the funny thing. I got up and I sang "It Is Well With My Soul." I sang the Lord's Prayer, and then I decided to switch it up. And Pavarotti has a famous aria called Nessun Dorma. It's in a ton of movies. It's his signature piece. So I looked at all of these inmates and I said, "Gentlemen," I said, "I'm going to sing an Italian aria called Nessun Dorma. And I want you to know that the lyrics are borderline irrelevant here. It's part of this play and musical and so on. But I said the reason I'm going to sing this to you is because every single time I sing this song, the music causes something to rise up in me." And I said to the point where I feel like I want to pull a sword out and go into battle. And so I'm looking at this guy who is he's everybody is seated except him, and he's standing in the back. And um, so it's this cold stone room with chain link fence everywhere. We're kind of in the bowels of the prison. And when I got done singing that song, that man was smiling ear to ear, and he had tears streaming down his face, and he was nodding at me, like, "It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay."
Yeah.
Well, I don't, to this day, I don't know what ever became of him.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to, connect with anybody. But you know what? I think that the times when I've had the biggest impact is when David Osk gets out of the way and doesn't have some weird agenda and just shows up and just, like you said, just be myself, right? Just be myself. Well, I happen to be, a guy who is a creative at heart. I love people like a hurricane. And I happen to sing, and God gave me the ability to sing and to, put goosebumps on people.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but I know that when I act in alignment with who I was created to be, I believe God is glorified, and I believe that uh, my life is way more fulfilling because I'm just acting in a genuine manner.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what showing up and just being authentic. I think it's the new superpower, right? We think that we have to grow and become and achieve an identity or achieve this status of some sort. And I think the opposite is actually the new superpower. It's showing up with a generous heart, with a sense of curiosity and wonder, and and doing and being, right, being yourself.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. And yeah, we don't have to do or become anything to just show up that way. We can do that right here, right now.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know what happened to that gentleman that you spoke of, but I'll tell you what, in that moment, everything was good, wasn't it? Everything
Um,
was okay,
he had hope,
and
and he had, there's a verse that says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. And hope is way more powerful, than we think. And I think that part of hope is actually surrendering, to this illusion of control. It's like, no, there's someone else here that has his hand on the board, as it were,
Yeah.
who is good and kind, and his name is love. And
Yeah.
I think that is absolutely the genesis of my hope and why I take any action. And when I stumble, that I don't crumble under the fact that I failed at something, because that's I'm not my own. I just need to show up and keep showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. For anybody that's sitting here right now thinking to themselves, man, Kevin, I really love David. I love how David shows up. Uh, what's any websites, any resources we can share in case they might like to follow up with you more and get to know more
Yeah,
about
well,
you and what you're
I
doing?
I appreciate that. Absolutely. Of course, on a side level, if you need a thermostat guard with a combo lock, you can go to statguardplus.com or lockboxpro.com. But I like to tell everybody that, if you reach out to me, I'm going to just do my best, to make your life better and to help you in some way. I'm not sure I can, but I will do my best. And so you can visit my website is davidask.com.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, if you want to send me an email, it's hello@davidask.com, and let's just see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, my goal for this podcast has always been really simple, and it's kind of a two-pronged thing. So I want to be able to give, my guest, you, the opportunity to share your story and honor somebody who's just had such a profound impact on your life and on your
Mm,
business. And the other side of this, for our listeners, who they too are entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs. I just want to use these stories and experiences to just inspire them to place an
yeah,
intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own lives. And
yeah.
David, with your help, we certainly delivered on that. And I just want to thank you so much. It has been such an honor having you on the show. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you, and I am excited to get this out there and share it with a lot of folks.
Well, thanks for having me. What a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely.